In the neon-lit corridors of American casinos, where fortunes are won and lost in seconds, the house always wins, always. Except for one time, when a 68-year-old mechanic named Frank Kowalski decided to rewrite those rules, one circuit board at a time. Between 2011 and 2014, Frank Kowalski walked away with $28 million from casinos across Nevada, Arizona, and California. He didn't use loaded dice, marked cards, or sleight of hand. He used a screwdriver, a soldering iron, and an intimate knowledge of how slot machines think. This is the story of how a forgotten electrician became the most successful casino thief in modern history, and how he vanished without a trace. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. Reno, Nevada. March 2011. Frank Kowalski's workshop sat on the eastern edge of town, wedged between an abandoned tire shop and a Mexican restaurant that had changed owners 3 times in 5 years. The building's white paint had turned gray from decades of desert dust, and the sign above the door, Kowalski Repairs, hung crooked on rusty chains that squeaked in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of motor oil, cigarette ash, and something electrical that had burned out long ago. Shelves lined every wall, cluttered with salvaged circuit boards, half-disassembled microwaves, radio components from the 1970s, and coffee cans filled with screws sorted by size. A workbench dominated the center of the room, scarred with soldering burns and stained with decades of grease. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed constantly, one of them flickering in a rhythm that Frank had long since stopped noticing. Frank spent his days fixing whatever people brought him: vending machines that ate dollar bills, motel dryers that stopped mid-cycle, broken televisions that weren't worth fixing but that people couldn't afford to replace. He charged $30 an hour and rarely saw more than 2 customers a day. On good weeks, he cleared $300. On bad weeks, he ate ramen noodles and wondered how much longer he could keep the lights on. He was 68 years old, 5'7", with thick glasses held together at one hinge with electrical tape. His hands trembled slightly from too many years handling live wires without proper safety equipment. His hair had gone completely white, and he wore the same blue mechanic's jacket every single day, his name embroidered on the chest in faded yellow thread. The jacket had been a gift from the Stardust Casino in 1985, back when they still gave a damn about employee morale. Frank was the kind of guy you'd walk past and never notice, says Detective Raymond Torres of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, who would later spend 2 years hunting him. Quiet, polite, the type who'd hold the door open for you and apologize when you bumped into him. You'd never guess he had a genius-level understanding of electrical engineering. You'd never guess he was capable of the most sophisticated casino heist in American history. But Frank Kowalski hadn't always been invisible. In 1982, fresh out of a technical college in Chicago and desperate for work, he'd been hired as an electrical technician at the Stardust Casino in Las Vegas, back when slot machines were still mechanical, before the digital revolution changed everything. He maintained the machines, fixed jammed reels, replaced worn-out springs, and understood every clicking gear and spinning wheel. He could diagnose a malfunction just by listening. A slight grinding sound meant a bent shaft. A hollow click meant a loose pawl. He knew these machines the way a concert pianist knows their instrument. "Those old machines were beautiful," Frank told a co-worker once during a cigarette break in the employee parking lot. "You could hear them thinking. Every sound meant something. The reels had weight, momentum. There was physics involved. Now they're just computers with pretty lights. There's no soul in them anymore." He worked at the Stardust for 11 years, earning a decent salary and a pension he thought would carry him through retirement. He married once, a blackjack dealer named Catherine, who left him in 1989, citing emotional unavailability. They had no children. Frank poured his energy into his work, becoming one of the most reliable technicians on the Strip. Management praised him. Co-workers borrowed his tools. He won Employee of the Month 3 times. Then came the layoffs of 1993, budget cuts, automation. Younger technicians who understood software better than circuitry, who could program microchips but couldn't solder a clean joint to save their lives. Frank was let go with 2 weeks severance and a handshake from a manager who couldn't meet his eyes. "We appreciate your years of service, Frank." "Really, but the industry's changing. We need people with different skill sets." The pension never materialized. The casino filed for bankruptcy in 2006, and Frank's retirement fund evaporated in legal fees and corporate restructuring. He received a letter from a law firm in Delaware explaining that his claim was being contested, that the bankruptcy proceedings would take years, that he should expect nothing. He moved to Reno because Las Vegas had become unbearable. Every street corner a reminder of what he'd lost. He opened his repair shop with the last of his savings and watched the years slide past like cards dealt from a crooked deck. By 2011, he was broke, bitter, and invisible. On March 17, 2011, Frank walked into the Silver Moon Casino on Virginia Street, a small, dingy establishment that catered to locals and tourists who couldn't afford the strip. The carpet was stained, the ceiling tiles water damaged, and the slot machines were ancient by industry standards. Frank sat at the bar with a $7 whiskey and watched the floor. A young couple, mid-20s, dressed in matching University of Nevada sweatshirts, stood in front of a Dollar Storm slot machine. The machine was old, its screen slightly faded, its buttons worn smooth by a million desperate fingers. Frank watched them feed bill after bill into the machine. $20, $50, $100, $200. The machine blinked and chimed and promised them riches, but the reels never lined up. Never even came close. The woman turned to her boyfriend, tears streaking her mascara. "Maybe one more," she said, her voice breaking. "Maybe it's about to hit. It has to hit eventually, right?" The boyfriend pulled out his wallet, hesitated, then fed in another 20. Frank set down his drink and walked over, his footsteps soft on the worn carpet. "Can I give you some advice?" The couple looked at him, this old man in a stained jacket, smelling faintly of soldering flux and tobacco. "That machine hasn't paid out in 3 hours," Frank said quietly, nodding toward the slot. "The algorithm won't reset until at least midnight. You're throwing money into a black hole." The boyfriend frowned, defensive. "How the hell would you know that?" Frank smiled, a sad, crooked thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Because I built machines like this 30 years ago. They don't run on luck, son. They run on voltage and timing. That machine is set to pay out 92% over its lifetime. But that 92% is spread across thousands of spins. The house always wins. Always. You're just paying for the lights and the noise." The woman wiped her eyes. "So we just wasted all that money?" "Yes," Frank said simply. "I'm sorry, but yes." The couple walked away, the boyfriend muttering angrily about know-it-all old bastards. Frank stood there alone, staring at the slot machine's blinking lights. The screen cycled through its attract mode, spinning gold coins, flashing dollar signs, promises of wealth and escape. He thought about Catherine leaving him, about the pension that never came, about 3 decades of loyalty rewarded with a handshake and severance that lasted 2 weeks, about the workshop that was slowly strangling him with debt, about the system that had chewed him up and spit him out and expected him to be grateful for the experience. The slot machine blinked at him. "Come on, try your luck. You could be the next big winner." That's when the idea sparked. Not revenge. Not exactly. Something colder. Something calculated. Correction. Frank began visiting scrapyards across northern Nevada, searching for discarded slot machines. He told the yard operators he was fixing them up for collectors. A hobby, nothing more. Most machines were obsolete models from the early 2000s, replaced by newer digital systems but still functional. The scrapyard owners were happy to sell them for $50 or $100 each, glad to free up space. He hauled them back to his workshop one by one, strapping them into the back of his ancient Ford pickup, driving carefully to avoid damaging the delicate internals. He stacked them against the walls like tombstones, each one a puzzle waiting to be solved. At night, with the door locked and the blinds drawn, Frank disassembled them. He removed the faceplates, disconnected the wiring harnesses, and studied the motherboards under a magnifying lamp. His hands didn't tremble when he worked. The tremor disappeared when he held tools, when he was solving problems. It was the only time he felt truly steady. Modern slot machines, he discovered, weren't truly random. They relied on pseudo-random number generators, computer chips that produce sequences of numbers based on a seed value. That seed was generated when the machine powered on, using the internal clock as a starting point. The clock value was fed into an algorithm that produced what appeared to be random results, but pseudo-random meant predictable. If you knew the algorithm and the seed value, you could predict the sequence. And here's what Frank remembered from his days at the Stardust. If you interrupted the power for just a fraction of a second, the machine would reboot. And during that reboot, the seed would reset to a predictable value based on the internal clock. Most machines use the number of milliseconds since midnight as their seed. If you forced a reboot at a specific time and knew the algorithm, you could predict when the jackpot sequence would appear. Frank spent 4 months testing his theory, living on coffee and cigarettes, sleeping 3 hours a night. His workshop became a laboratory. He filled notebooks with calculations, wrote firmware analysis programs on an old laptop, cross-referenced technical manuals he downloaded from engineering forums. He built a device the size of a thumb drive, with a small battery, a microcontroller he'd salvaged from a broken DVD player, and a relay switch he'd pulled from an industrial thermostat. When activated, it would interrupt the machine's power supply for exactly 27 milliseconds, just long enough to force a reboot without triggering an error code or alerting the casino's monitoring systems. He called it a re-trigger switch. The device cost him $11 in parts and represented 300 hours of testing. In July 2011, Frank drove 3 hours east to Ely, Nevada, a dying mining town with a single casino called the Copper Queen. The casino was attached to a hotel that smelled like mildew and carpet cleaner. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the floor was nearly empty except for a few retirees playing penny slots and a bartender who looked half asleep. Frank approached the casino manager, a heavy-set man named Dale who looked perpetually exhausted and perpetually annoyed. His name tag was crooked, and he had a coffee stain on his white shirt. "Excuse me," Frank said politely, his voice soft and non-threatening. "I'm with Silverline Machine Maintenance. We're doing courtesy inspections on older IGT machines in the region. Mind if I take a look at your floor?" Dale squinted at him suspiciously. "We didn't call for any inspection." Frank handed him a business card, professionally printed, complete with a fake company logo he'd designed himself using free software. The card listed a P.O. box in Reno and a phone number that connected to a burner cell in Frank's pocket. "No charge, sir. We're just checking for firmware vulnerabilities, new security protocols from the Gaming Commission. You know how it is. Cover our asses, cover yours." Dale glanced at the card, then back at Frank. "You got credentials?" Frank pulled out a laminated badge he'd made at a FedEx office, featuring his photo and the Silverline logo. "Of course. I can wait while you call the commission if you'd like to verify, but I've got 12 more casinos to hit this week. Your call." Dale sighed heavily. "Knock yourself out. Just don't unplug anything important." Frank smiled gratefully. "I'll be invisible, I promise." He spent 90 minutes examining machines, carrying a small toolbox and a clipboard. He made notes, checked serial numbers, and nodded professionally at passing employees. He found what he was looking for. A double diamond model from 2008, tucked in a corner near the restrooms where foot traffic was minimal and surveillance cameras had a poor angle. The cabinet screws were standard Phillips head, and the internal wiring was accessible from the rear panel. He knelt down, opened the back panel, and located the power supply board, a green circuit board about the size of a paperback book. He clipped the re-trigger switch onto the main voltage line using alligator clips, secured it with electrical tape colored to match the existing wiring, and routed the antenna wire along an existing cable bundle where it wouldn't be noticed. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. He closed the panel, tightened the screws, and stood up. His knees popped. His lower back ached, but his hands were steady. He left the casino, drove to a McDonald's 15 miles away, and ate a hamburger while watching the clock. That evening, Frank returned to the Copper Queen as a customer. He wore different clothes: jeans, a plain green shirt, a baseball cap with a John Deere logo. He'd shaved his face and put on different glasses, reading glasses instead of his regular frames. He walked slowly past the double diamond machine, glanced at it casually, then sat down. He inserted a $20 bill. The machine blinked to life. its screen glowing with animated coins and lucky sevens. He pressed the spin button. The reels spun, a blur of cherries, bars, and gold symbols. Then, just as they began to slow, Frank reached into his pocket and pressed a small remote transmitter he'd built from a garage door opener. The screen flickered, just for a fraction of a second. The machine's cooling fan stuttered. The reels stopped. 3 gold bars. Top line. The machine erupted in sound. Bells, sirens, flashing lights that strobed across the empty casino floor. A digital display flashed. Jackpot, $24,000. Frank sat perfectly still, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. His vision tunneled. His ears rang. For a moment he couldn't breathe. It worked. Jesus Christ, it actually worked. A floor attendant rushed over, a young woman with bleached hair and too much makeup. She was grinning. "Holy cow, buddy, you just hit the big one. Oh my God, congratulations." Frank smiled, a quiet, grandfatherly smile that he forced onto his face like a mask. "Beginner's luck," he said, his voice barely steady. The attendant called over a manager. Forms were filled out. ID was checked. Frank gave them his real driver's license. There was no reason not to. He was a regular player who'd gotten lucky. Nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. A check was cut. $24,000 minus taxes. Frank walked out of the Copper Queen Casino 90 minutes later with a check for $18,720 in his jacket pocket and the absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. Over the next 8 months, Frank Kowalski perfected his system with the methodical precision of a watchmaker. He created a complete fake identity as a traveling maintenance contractor. He registered Silverline Machine Maintenance as an LLC in Nevada, paying the filing fee with money from the Copper Queen jackpot. He built a professional website using a template, listing generic services and posting stock photos of slot machines. He created a business bank account, deposited $1,000, and started generating fake invoices and service records. On paper, Silverline looked like a legitimate small business that had been operating for 5 years. He bought a used white cargo van for $3,000 paid cash, registered it under the Silverline business name. He painted the fake logo on both sides, clean, professional lettering that said Silverline Machine Maintenance, licensed and insured. He filled the back with legitimate repair tools, multimeters, cable testers, replacement parts he'd salvaged from his scrapyard machines. If anyone looked inside, they'd see a working technician's van, nothing more. He created a system for researching targets. He'd visit casinos as a regular customer first, map out their surveillance coverage, identify vulnerable machines, and note the security staff's patterns. Older casinos were easier. Their cameras had blind spots, their guards were lazy, their machines were outdated, but even newer establishments had weaknesses if you knew where to look. He studied casino maintenance schedules by calling casinos and claiming to be from the Gaming Commission, asking when their last slot inspections had been performed. Most managers handed over the information without question. He learned which models were most vulnerable, which manufacturers used predictable algorithms, which firmware versions had exploitable flaws. His method became simple, elegant, and nearly invisible. Enter a casino as a technician during the day, install the re-trigger switch in 2 or 3 machines, then return at night as a regular player. The switches were powered by watch batteries that could last 3 to 4 months. He could hit a machine multiple times before the battery died, and even when it died, the switch would simply stop working. It wouldn't trigger any alarms or leave any evidence. The beauty of Frank's scheme was its subtlety. The machines didn't malfunction. They didn't dispense coins in error. They didn't show any signs of tampering. They simply paid out jackpots that looked completely legitimate. Every win was logged in the casino system as a normal payout, verified by floor attendants, and paid according to standard procedures. Frank was careful, painfully, obsessively careful. He never hit the same casino twice in 1 month. He never won jackpots large enough to trigger IRS reporting requirements. He kept his wins under $10,000 per machine, which meant they didn't require W-2G forms. He spread his activity across dozens of casinos: Reno, Sparks, Carson City, Laughlin, Lake Tahoe, Elko, Winnemucca, even small tribal casinos in rural areas. He dressed like a retired factory worker on vacation. Khaki pants, polo shirts, comfortable shoes. He carried a fanny pack and a soda. He made small talk with cocktail waitresses, always tipping $3 per drink. He played other machines before and after, hitting his targets, losing small amounts to create a pattern of normal gambling behavior. He never drew attention to himself. He never celebrated too loudly. He accepted his jackpots with surprised gratitude and mild embarrassment. He was invisible, says Amanda Reeves, a former slot attendant at the Nugget Casino in Sparks, interviewed 3 years after the investigation. I remember him because he was always so polite. He'd say thank you every time I brought him a soda. He'd ask about my day, remember my name. I saw him win maybe 3 or 4 times over the summer of 2012, but it never seemed suspicious. Slots hit all the time. That's what they're designed to do, give you just enough wins to keep you playing. I thought Frank was just a lucky old guy. What Amanda didn't know was that Frank had rigged 4 machines on her floor, strategically chosen for their locations near service corridors and away from pit boss stations. Frank developed routines to avoid detection. He'd drive to a city the day before a job, check into a cheap motel under his real name, and scout the location. He'd perform the technical installation the next morning as Frank Kowalski, Silverline Maintenance Contractor. Then he'd check out of the motel, drive 50 miles away, check into a different motel under his real name again, and return to the casino that night as Frank Kowalski, retired electrician from Reno. On paper, he was always somewhere legitimate. The paper trail was clean. By December 2011, Frank had accumulated over $1.2 million. He kept the cash in a storage unit in Fernley, Nevada, a small desert town 30 miles east of Reno. The unit was rented under the Silverline business name. Inside, he'd stacked old oil drums and filled them with cash, then covered the drums with boxes of legitimate electrical parts and obsolete circuit boards. If anyone opened the unit, they'd see exactly what you'd expect to see in a maintenance contractor's storage space. By June 2012, that number had grown to 4.7 million. Frank didn't buy a new car. He didn't move to a bigger house. He didn't take vacations or upgrade his wardrobe. He continued living in the apartment above his workshop, eating microwave dinners and wearing the same clothes. He still took on legitimate repair jobs, fixing microwaves and vending machines for $30 an hour. He maintained the appearance of a man barely scraping by. The only change in his routine was a new habit. Every Sunday morning, he drove out to the storage unit, opened one of the oil drums, and counted the money. He'd run his trembling hands through stacks of hundreds and 20s, feeling the paper between his fingers, confirming it was real. It was real. It was his, and no one suspected a thing. For the first time in 2 decades, Frank Kowalski slept soundly. In September 2012, Frank made a decision that would eventually lead to his downfall. He decided he needed help. The work was becoming exhausting. Driving hundreds of miles every week, installing switches in uncomfortable positions, playing slots for hours while his back screamed and his knees ached. At 69 years old, Frank's body was failing him. The tremors in his hands were getting worse. He'd developed arthritis in his fingers. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel twice, jerking awake as his truck drifted onto the shoulder of dark highways. He needed people he could trust. But trust was a rare commodity in Frank's world. He'd been alone for so long, burned by so many people, that the idea of bringing partners into his operation felt like inviting poison into his bloodstream. But he was going to collapse if he kept going alone. And the money was too good. The system was too perfect. He couldn't stop. Not yet. The first person he approached was Maria Lopez, a 52-year-old single mother he'd known since his days at the Stardust. Maria had worked as a cocktail waitress from 1984 to 2005, 21 years of carrying drinks, smiling at drunk men, and pretending their jokes were funny. Then came the car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned her Honda Civic, leaving her with a crushed hip, 3 shattered vertebrae, and chronic pain that would never fully heal. She'd been denied workers' compensation. The casino claimed her injuries weren't work-related, even though she'd been driving home from a shift. She'd spent 2 years fighting lawyers and losing. By 2012, she was working part-time at a dry cleaner for $9 an hour, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in North Las Vegas with her adult son, and rationing her pain medication because she couldn't afford refills. Frank visited her on a Tuesday evening in September, bringing Chinese takeout and a bottle of cheap wine. Maria's apartment was clean but depressing. Thrift store furniture, water stains on the ceiling, the constant hum of highway traffic through thin walls. They ate in silence for a while, both of them remembering better days. Finally, Frank set down his fork and said, "Maria, how would you like to make some real money?" Maria laughed, a bitter, exhausted sound. "Frank, if you're about to offer me some pyramid scheme or ask me to sell essential oils—" "I've been taking money from casinos," Frank interrupted. "A lot of money, and I want to share it with you." Maria stared at him, her plastic fork halfway to her mouth. "You're robbing casinos?" "Not robbing, correcting." Frank opened the laptop he'd brought and showed her spreadsheets, photographs of circuit boards, technical diagrams that looked like alien hieroglyphics. "These machines are designed to steal from desperate people. They're mathematically rigged to drain bank accounts and destroy lives. I'm just evening the odds, taking back what they took from us." Maria studied the screen, her expression unreadable. "How much?" 4.7 million so far. You'd get 10% of every job. All you have to do is distract floor staff while I work. Be my cover. Make me look like a regular customer instead of a guy working alone." Maria was quiet for a long time, her fingers drumming on the table. Frank could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the muffled argument from the apartment next door, the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she said, "When do we start?" The second recruit was Maria's son, Darren, a 26-year-old computer science dropout who'd been living in her spare bedroom for 3 years. Darren was brilliant with technology but catastrophic with people. He'd lost job after job due to attitude problems, which really meant he couldn't pretend to respect managers he thought were idiots. He'd been fired from Best Buy for telling a customer their computer problems were Darwinian selection in action. He'd been fired from a call center for hanging up on someone who couldn't follow basic instructions. He spent most of his time playing video games, smoking weed, and writing angry manifestos about capitalism on Reddit. Frank met him the same night he recruited Maria. Darren was exactly what Frank expected. Overweight, unkempt, wearing a t-shirt with a crude joke printed on it, and radiating the defensive arrogance of someone who knows they're smart but has nothing to show for it. "Your mom said you're good with code," Frank said, cutting through the awkward introductions. "I need someone who can help me modernize my system." Frank held up the retrigger switch, the crude prototype he'd been using for over a year. "This works, but it's limited. I need something programmable, something that can adapt to different firmware versions, different timing patterns, something that can transmit data wirelessly so I don't have to physically press a button. Can you do that?" Darren picked up the device, turned it over in his hands. His eyes lit up, the first genuine interest Frank had seen in him. "You built this?" 30 years of experience. Darren grinned. "This is fucking brilliant. This is like, you're literally hacking reality. Physical hacking. I didn't even know this was possible. So you can improve it?" "Hell yes, I can improve it. Give me 2 weeks and I'll turn this into something from a spy movie." Darren delivered in 10 days. The new device was a masterpiece of miniaturization. No bigger than a SIM card, it contained a programmable microcontroller, wireless transceiver, and backup power supply. It could be configured for different slot machine models through a smartphone app that Darren had coded himself. It could adjust its timing based on power supply variations, detect security countermeasures, and even transmit diagnostic data back to Frank's phone in real time. "It's a goddamn smart re-trigger switch," Darren explained, practically bouncing with excitement. "You can configure it remotely, adjust parameters on the fly, even kill it remotely if you think it's been discovered. And the power consumption is so low that the battery will last 6 months, maybe longer." Frank tested it on a machine in his workshop and watched in awe as Darren's code executed flawlessly. The machine rebooted exactly when commanded. The timing was precise to the millisecond, and there was no detectable signature that would alert monitoring systems. "You're a genius," Frank said quietly. Darren shrugged, but he was grinning. "Finally, someone who fucking appreciates me." With Maria running distraction, flirting with security guards, asking floor managers elaborate questions about loyalty programs, employers' club benefits, creating commotion when needed, and Darren monitoring surveillance camera loops from a laptop in a nearby parking lot, Frank could install switches in under 2 minutes per machine. Their first job together was at the Lakeside Inn in Lake Tahoe on a Friday afternoon in October. The weather was beautiful, the casino was crowded with weekend tourists, and security was focused on the high-limit gaming rooms. Frank entered as a technician, wearing his silver-lined jacket and carrying his clipboard. Maria entered separately, dressed in tourist casual, playing penny slots near the target machines. Darren sat in Maria's car in the parking structure, his laptop connected to a cellular hotspot, streaming the casino's surveillance feeds through a vulnerability he'd discovered in their Wi-Fi network. North Corridor cameras are on a loop, Darren said through Frank's earpiece, a tiny Bluetooth device that looked like a hearing aid. You've got 4 minutes before the next guard patrol. Frank worked quickly, installing 3 of the new switches in machines that Darren had identified as running vulnerable firmware. His hands didn't shake. He was in the zone, his mind completely focused, his body moving with practiced efficiency. Done, Frank whispered, pulling out. That evening, they returned separately. Frank and Maria played the rigged machines while Darren monitored for any signs of increased security attention. Each time Maria won, she let out a delighted shriek, drawing attention away from the technical impossibility of what had just happened and framing it as luck, randomness, casino magic. They walked out with $43,000 split across multiple jackpots. Over the next 18 months, the trio operated like a well-oiled machine. They developed routines, backup plans, emergency protocols. They created detailed scouting reports for each casino. They rotated their appearance. Frank would grow a beard, then shave it, wear different styles of glasses, change his gait. Maria rotated through a dozen different wigs and personas. Darren upgraded their technology constantly, adding new features, patching vulnerabilities, staying ahead of security systems. They expanded their territory into California, hitting tribal casinos in the Central Valley where oversight was minimal and security was often contracted to underpaid guards who didn't care. They worked across state lines, exploiting the jurisdictional chaos between Nevada Gaming Control, California's Bureau of Gambling Control, and federal authorities who rarely coordinated on cases involving amounts below $1 million per incident. Frank paid Maria and Darren 15% each, keeping the remaining 70% for himself. Even split, Maria was making more in a month than she'd made in a year at the dry cleaner. Darren paid off his credit card debt, bought new computer equipment, and started sleeping normally for the first time in years. They were careful. They were methodical. They were successful. By March 2014, they had stolen $28 million. And then Frank made a mistake. Frank Kowalski's downfall began with a single decision, hitting the Belmont Palace in Las Vegas. The Belmont was a corporate-owned mega casino on the Strip, one of the newest and most technologically advanced gaming establishments in the city. It had opened in 2012 with a billion-dollar budget, cutting-edge surveillance systems, and slot machines that represented the latest generation of gaming technology. Frank knew it was risky. The security was tighter than anywhere they'd hit before. The surveillance was omnipresent. Facial recognition cameras at every entrance, behavioral analysis software, monitoring player patterns, real-time auditing systems that tracked every coin drop and payout. But the Belmont also had the highest-paying slots in Nevada. A single progressive jackpot could net them $500,000. And Frank had become convinced, obsessed really, with the idea that he could beat their system. I told him it was a bad idea, Maria would later testify, her voice breaking as she spoke to federal prosecutors. I told him we'd made enough money. I said we could stop, divide what we had, disappear, live normal lives. But Frank said this was the big one, the retirement score, the final job that would set us up forever. He said he'd crack their security. He said he was sure. On March 8, 2014, Frank entered the Belmont Palace disguised as a technician from IGT, International Game Technology, the world's largest slot machine manufacturer. His credentials were flawless. Darren had spent 3 weeks hacking into IGT's contractor database, creating a fake employee profile complete with work history, certification numbers, and authorization codes that checked out when scanned. The badge looked perfect. The right weight, the right holographic security features, the right magnetic stripe encoding. Frank wore a white shirt, black pants, and an IGT technician vest he'd bought from a retiring technician in Arizona for $200. He carried a legitimate IGT tool case filled with diagnostic equipment. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be. He spent 90 minutes on the floor, ostensibly conducting routine firmware updates on a bank of megabucks progressive machines near the north entrance. These were the big ones, the slots with jackpots in the millions, linked across multiple casinos, the machines that destroyed lives and occasionally created millionaires. Frank installed 4 of Darren's advanced switches, working smoothly and professionally, while Maria distracted nearby security with a loud complaint about a machine that had eaten her $100 bill. "Clean exit," Darren said through the earpiece. "No red flags." That night, Frank and Maria returned as customers. Frank dressed in tourist casual, Hawaiian shirt, cargo shorts, a camera around his neck. Maria wore a blonde wig and a sparkly dress that made her look like a suburban mom on a girls' weekend. They played different machines for an hour, establishing their presence as normal gamblers, then casually drifted toward the rigged megabucks machines. Darren waited in the parking garage, monitoring police scanners and the casino's security network through a compromised access point he discovered in their employee Wi-Fi. Maria played the first machine for 20 minutes before hitting a $47,000 jackpot. Bells rang, lights flashed, a crowd gathered. Maria screamed and jumped and hugged strangers while Frank stood nearby, smiling and taking photos like a supportive friend. They moved to the second machine, another jackpot, $63,000, then another, and another. By the time they left, they'd won $284,000 across 4 different machines in less than 3 hours. It was too much, too fast, too perfect. But Frank was riding high on adrenaline and decades of accumulated bitterness. He'd beaten the biggest casino on the Strip. He'd proven that even their billion-dollar security systems couldn't stop him. "We should have walked away right then," Maria said later. "I could see it in his eyes. He thought he was invincible." What Frank didn't know was that the Belmont's Megabucks machines included a new security feature that hadn't been present in any of the machines they'd hit before. Internal timestamp logs that recorded every power fluctuation, every reboot, every millisecond of operational data, stored in encrypted memory that was uploaded to a central server every 6 hours. 3 days later, on March 11th, a Belmont auditor named Jessica Chen ran a routine diagnostic check and noticed an anomaly. 4 Megabucks machines on the North Bank had experienced brief power interruptions on March 8th, all within a 2-hour window during the day shift, all followed by major jackpots within 12 hours. "It was statistically impossible," Chen says now, sitting in her office overlooking the Strip. She's in her 30s, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who sees patterns where others see noise. The odds of 4 machines randomly rebooting, then paying out near maximum jackpots within hours, is something like 1 in 400 million. Either we had the unluckiest machines in Vegas, or someone was manipulating them. And I don't believe in that kind of bad luck. Chen pulled the technical logs and found something even more disturbing. The power interruptions had occurred at exact 27 millisecond intervals. Not 26, not 28, exactly 27 across all 4 machines. Natural power fluctuations don't work that way. Nature isn't that precise, but engineers are. Chen reported the anomaly to Belmont's head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb, who'd spent 15 years investigating white-collar crime before retiring to the private sector. Webb pulled surveillance footage from March 8th and started looking for patterns. He found Frank, an older man in an IGT vest working on those exact machines during the exact time frame when the power interruptions occurred. Working alone, methodically, professionally. Then 12 hours later, the same man returns. Different clothes, but same face, same height, same distinctive way of walking with his shoulders slightly hunched. Webb ran the face through the Belmont's facial recognition system and got nothing. He ran it through Nevada Gaming Control's database and got nothing. The man was a ghost. But then Webb did something smart. He pulled footage from neighboring casinos. The Strip's casinos share security information through a private network, a cooperative effort to identify card counters, cheaters, and other threats. He sent Frank's face to every major casino in Vegas, and he got hits, lots of them. The same man appearing at the Luxor last November, at the Tropicana in January, at the Circus in February, always playing slots, always winning, never making a scene, never triggering any alerts. Webb called the Nevada Gaming Control Board. On March 15, 2014, Detective Raymond Torres received a call that would consume the next 2 years of his life. The investigation moved with the focused intensity of a military operation. Detective Raymond Torres was a 20-year veteran of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, a specialized law enforcement agency tasked with protecting the integrity of the state's gaming industry. He'd investigated card-counting rings, dealer theft operations, and money laundering schemes, but he'd never seen anything like this. The scope was staggering, Torres says, sitting in his office in Las Vegas. He's in his 50s now, gray at the temples with the calm demeanor of someone who's seen every variation of human greed. This wasn't some opportunistic theft. This wasn't a dealer skimming chips or a player using marked cards. This was systematic, organized, and sophisticated. Whoever was doing this understood slot machines better than the engineers who built them. Torres assembled a task force, FBI cybercrime specialists, forensic accountants, casino security experts, and software engineers from IGT. They pulled records from every casino in Nevada, looking for similar patterns. Brief power fluctuations, followed by major payouts. They found hundreds of instances across 24 casinos spanning 3 years. The pattern was everywhere once you knew what to look for. Small jackpots, always under $10,000, always paid out within hours of a mysterious power interruption, always on older model machines with known firmware vulnerabilities. We estimated the total theft at somewhere between $25 and $30 million, Torres says. But here's the thing. Most of it was never reported as suspicious. The casinos had paid out the money as legitimate jackpots. On paper, everything looked normal. If that auditor at the Belmont hadn't noticed the pattern, this could have gone on for years. Surveillance footage from multiple casinos showed the same man. Elderly, white, blue mechanic's jacket, always polite, always near the machines just before they malfunction. He wore different clothes each time, sometimes glasses, sometimes not, occasionally with a beard, but the facial recognition software confirmed it was the same person. Torres ran the face through every database available: FBI, Interpol, DMV records, social media, reverse image searches. Nothing. The man was invisible. Then a junior analyst named Katie Ramos made the breakthrough. She was reviewing footage from the Copper Queen Casino in Ely, one of the earliest hits back in July 2011. The old man was there talking to a slot attendant, collecting his jackpot winnings. The attendant checked his ID. "Zoom in on that ID," Torres ordered. The image quality was poor, but they could make out a name: Frank Kowalski, Nevada driver's license. Within hours, they had everything. Frank Kowalski, age 71, last known address in Reno. Former electrical technician at the Stardust Casino, laid off in 1993. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. A ghost who'd been hiding in plain sight, using his real name and real ID the entire time. He was so confident that he never bothered to hide his identity, Torres says, shaking his head. That's how good his system was. He knew the casinos wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. Further investigation revealed Maria Lopez and her son Darren. Surveillance footage showed them working together. Maria creating distractions, Darren always nearby with a laptop. The team dynamics were obvious once you knew what to look for. Torres obtained federal warrants for all 3 suspects: Frank Kowalski, Maria Lopez, and Darren Lopez. Charges included wire fraud, conspiracy, computer fraud, and theft from a gaming establishment, a specialized Nevada statute that carried enhanced penalties. On April 3, 2014, at 6:47 a.m., Torres led a multi-agency raid on Frank's workshop in Reno. The morning was cold and gray, the desert wind carrying dust and the smell of sagebrush. Torres arrived with 12 agents: FBI, gaming control, local police. They wore tactical vests and carried battering rams, prepared for anything. The building was unlocked. The lights were on. But Frank was gone. Inside, investigators found a treasure trove of evidence that would have convicted him 10 times over. 23 disassembled slot machines lined up against the walls like patients in a morgue. their guts exposed, their circuit boards labeled with handwritten notes, computer files containing firmware code for dozens of slot machine models, detailed specifications, vulnerability analyses, spreadsheets tracking casino schedules, security patterns, machine locations, maps with targeted casinos marked in red, and most damning of all, a 3-ring binder labeled "Correction of Probability" in Frank's precise handwriting. Inside were hundreds of pages of calculations, algorithms, test results, and philosophical notes about the mathematics of gambling and the immorality of slot machine design. Reading that binder was like reading a manifesto, Torres says. Frank didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as someone correcting an injustice. He'd written entire essays about how casinos mathematically exploit poor people, how the house edge is a form of systematic theft. He thought he was the good guy. They also found photographs. Frank standing next to Maria, both of them smiling at a casino somewhere. Genuine happiness on their faces. Maria's son Darren in the background holding a laptop, looking proud. Torres immediately issued federal warrants and put out an APB for all 3 suspects. The manhunt began. Darren Lopez was arrested 5 weeks later, on May 9, 2014, at an auto body shop in Tucson, Arizona. He'd been trying to launder $47,000 through a fake invoice scheme, paying the shop for custom body work that was never performed, then getting a check back for 70% of the amount, minus the shop owner's cut. The shop owner got nervous and called the police. Tucson PD ran Darren's ID, saw the federal warrant, and detained him. Darren broke during interrogation almost immediately. He wasn't built for pressure. He was a 26-year-old kid who'd thought he was playing a video game, and suddenly he was facing 20 years in federal prison. Frank was the brains, Darren told investigators, his voice shaking, tears streaming down his face. I just wrote the code he asked for. I didn't think it was real. I mean, I knew it was real, but it felt like we were just outsmarting a video game. My mom and I were just trying to survive. We were broke. Frank made it sound so simple, so victimless. He said the casinos steal from poor people every day, and we were just taking back a tiny fraction. Darren told them everything: the technical specifications of the devices, the locations where they'd buried money, the methods they'd used to avoid detection. He gave them Maria's location. Maria Lopez turned herself in 3 days later in San Diego, accompanied by a lawyer. She'd been staying with her sister, paralyzed by guilt and fear, unable to sleep, barely eating. When she heard Darren had been arrested, she knew it was over. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Maria would testify about everything: the recruitment, the operations, the money. In exchange, the federal prosecutors agreed to recommend a reduced sentence. During her deposition, Maria cried through most of her testimony. She described how Frank had recruited her, how desperate she'd been, how the money had felt like salvation. She talked about the chronic pain from her car accident, the bills she couldn't pay, the medications she couldn't afford. I didn't think we were hurting anyone, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. The casinos have billions. They're designed to take money from poor people like me. Frank said we were just correcting the balance. He made it sound noble, like Robin Hood or something. I wanted to believe him because I needed the money so badly. But I knew. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. Maria Lopez was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for conspiracy and wire fraud. She served 2 years before being released on parole in 2016. She now works as a home health aide in Phoenix, living in a small apartment, sending money to her son. Darren Lopez received 7 years and served 5. He was released in 2019 and now works as a software developer for a cybersecurity firm, ironically one that helps casinos detect fraud. But Frank Kowalski, he vanished like smoke.